curious in one way that Dennis Kelly, who's one of the most brutal and uncompromising playwrights of this century, should have had his greatest success with a West End musical, Matilda. But in another way, of course, it's not that curious at all. There's a beautiful match between the dark cruelty of Roald Dahl's imagination and that of Dennis Kelly's. But also, as I am currently very aware as I read several of Roald Dahl's books to my son, those stories are great on the page, but they're very untheatrical in lots of ways, or maybe I should say undramatic in certain ways. Dahl's preferred story type is the picaresque. One thing happens, then another thing happens, then another thing happens. Each section is kind of equal. Each section, in a way, is identical. The elimination of the children in the chocolate factory, the various perils that befall the giant peach or the great glass elevator, the indignities meted out by the magic finger, they're all kind of the same. There's not much overall shaping in the intensity, allowing for kind of anticipation or resolution. And that's not, may I hasten to say, to criticize Roald Dahl. It works brilliantly if you're reading a chapter a night to your kid at bedtime. But it doesn't lend itself, nor should it, to the more controlled and concentrated duration of a theatre performance, where the experience sort of requires some shaping, some build, some integrity, where each moment is in tension between past and present and future. And this is what Dennis Kelly did brilliantly with Matilda: respect the material, but find a rigorous theatrical shape for it, in which, of course, Tim Minchin's songs fit beautifully, probably attracting most of the attention, but only because they have an immaculate setting in which they can sit, seamlessly working their magic. The original story of Matilda is another series of set pieces and revelations, not all of which cohere, I think, in a particularly shapely way. For example, Matilda's telekinetic powers is an odd moment that isn't really pulled through the story very consistently and seems to disappear in a rather unsatisfactory way. If any of you have seen the 1996 movie of Matilda, they went big on the powers in a way of trying to make the thing cohere. Dennis Kelly, on the other hand, downplays them almost to nothing. Instead, he invents a brilliant secondary narrative spine, a fable about an acrobat and an escapologist that both becomes a means of generating one of the big reveals of the story, but also reinforces a sense of narrative movement and development. It's a great little subplot because it feels both very Roald Dahl and very Dennis Kelly. Dennis's professionally produced debut was in 2003 with the play Debris, or Debris. The difference becomes sort of important in the play. What is now Theatre 503 was then the Latchmere. Debris is a small-scale, brilliantly gothic play that reminds me of Philip Ridley a bit in its baroque, surreal violence and sense of gangland terror, and is perhaps the most Matilda-esque thing he wrote until Matilda. But it was in the middle of the 2000s that he became very quickly, I think, a major presence in British playwriting. In May 2005, his piece about the interface between international terrorism and kind of local urban violence, Osama the Hero, opened at Hampstead, followed 4 months later by his very literally locked room mystery After the End, produced by Payne's Plough at the Bush. Before those, in March, he did a terrific version of Gerhard Hauptmann's Rose Burnt, which opened at the Arcola and starred, I think, Bertie Carvel, who would go on to create Miss Trunchbull in Matilda the Musical. A year after that, the Royal Exchange in Manchester and the Young Vic in London produced his astonishing Love and Money, which is a riddling, time-jumping play about, love and money. I don't know if this is true, but I sometimes wonder if the title is a self-conscious sort of reinvention or reincarnation of Shopping and Fucking as a title, sort of for the new century. It certainly felt like one of those plays that just suddenly captures the the present in a new way. It was nasty and bold and darkly funny and seedy and strange and finally heartbreakingly yearning. It's still one of the great plays of the 21st century, I think. These plays all have a wonderful mixture of minimalism and maximalism. They are in some ways pared down, intense, often set in interiors, within damaged or psychologically or even physically violent relationships. They're compressed in a way that makes your heart beat faster. But linguistically, there's a kind of extravagance to them, not in a flowery way. The plays are never that. But his characters have a driving, inarticulate articulacy to them. Characteristic, I think, of Dennis Kelly's plays is the character who is sullenly monosyllabic until something snaps and then the frustration breached. They go on a long, often foul-mouthed riff about something which may later turn out to be sheer storytelling. Because in fact, he's fascinated by liars. I once saw a kind of scratch night at Payne's Plough, a scratch night that also included Mark Ravenhill's first outing. I think it was the first outing of his extraordinary satire product. But elsewhere on the bill, Dennis Kelly performed a monologue called, if I recall correctly, Dennis is a Liar. And liars are right the way through his plays. In 2007 at the Hampstead Theatre, he wrote a play called Taking Care of Baby, a play that looked like it was a verbatim play, but was actually lying, and ended up being a very prescient piece about fake news and a post-truth world. And kind of speaking of being prescient, 2013's play for the Royal Court, The Ritual Slaughter of George Mastromus, depicts a vastly wealthy businessman whose success is founded on his complete indifference to the truth. Now, who does that make me think of? George Mastromus is an example, I think, of a kind of shift in Dennis's work in the second decade of the century. As I say, his earlier plays are mostly sort of claustrophobic, intense, often with a kind of Pinteresque pressure cooker quality. There's no better example of that, I think, than his last play of the first decade, Orphans, also for Payne's Plough, which opens with a married couple's dinner being interrupted by a young man, his shirt covered in blood, and the sense of violence inside and outside the house, in the past and potentially in the future, builds through the play, kind of busting the family apart. But this busting apart the family increasingly affects the plays too. DNA, written for the Connections program, has a much larger cast than any previous play of his, partly because I suppose it was written for schools and youth groups, and it creates a kind of choral effect in the writing. His vast play for the RSC, The Gods Weep, inspired by King Lear, no less, was a 3-hour rewrite that takes on the full national collapse of Shakespeare's play. That's a play about the decline of a business mogul. George Mastromus is about the rise of one. And in that play, the form of it exploded even more, each scene seeming to be written in a different style. Girls and Boys from 2018 was on the surface a swerve in style again back to minimalism, or at least apparently. It's a monologue for a woman, played stunningly by Kerry Mulligan in a startlingly unexpected performance. but it's deceptive because it moves between modes, direct address, scenes in a frozen past that turn out to be the present. And you end up realizing that it's a sly and devastating reinvention of form that really complicates the monologue, but also builds to an extraordinarily powerful emotional release at the end. But even through the evolving structures and forms, there's a love of storytelling, whether that's the liars and their tall tales, or even just the plays themselves with their dark, remorseless journeys into kind of the bleak underworld. And for that reason, it shouldn't be surprising that Matilda, the musical, is such a success. Dennis Kelly is an extraordinary playwright with a really fine sense of narrative and form. He's also a very funny guy, and I really can't wait to talk to him again about his work.
There we go. Did that work?
There you go.
How you doing? You all right?
I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, good. Nice book background.
Yeah, it's fake, but it's still.
I can see it's green screen. I can see the.
Yeah, sometimes bits of my body disappear in the middle of these interviews. Yeah. but that's really happening. It's not.
That's a medical thing. Let's not talk about that. That's really impressive. Could I borrow your plays then? Could I borrow your plays photograph? Because mine's shit back there.
I'll email my plays to you.
Mine's crap. And I'll put a little thing at the bottom of the screen that will say plays courtesy of Dan Revelato. Please do.
You'd be very welcome. You can plagiarize my plays. How is lockdown for you?
Oh, fucking hell. I've had enough of it now, Dan. I've had enough of it. I tell you what, I've fucking had enough of it.
Have you had
not been out?
Have you had any projects that have been sort of derailed or delayed or?
I've had something that I derailed it because I said to them, I don't think we're going to be interested in this, or I don't think the world is going to be different. Let's wait and see what the world is like.
I want to ask. I want to start, if this is right, sort of at the beginning of the interview, try and talk a little bit more generally about kind of the ways in which you write your process and so on. And I thought the way I'm tending to start this is just by asking typically where your plays begin, if there is a kind of typical way they begin. And by that I mean, is it that there's an issue you're concerned with, or an image comes into your head, or a formal conceit, or what? Is there a typical way?
Yeah, I don't know. It's sort of you start in different places with different projects, I think. So I think sometimes I've just sort of had an image and I've started with that, and I've written that. Or sometimes I've had things that I want to talk about, and I've sort of then gone out to find various bits and pieces to sort of help me do that. I think the best version is a bit of both, where you have, you kind of have an image, not an image, but a sort of a kind of a thing that you want to, kind of an idea that you want to explore. That's not necessarily a big political idea, but there's just a small sort of something between people, an interaction or something that might start off a play, and then. But also, in the back of your mind, you've also got these questions you've got buzzing around that have been maybe there for a couple of years, and they finally sort of meet together, and you think, oh shit, these two things work. This, and sometimes you don't really realise what it is until you've started writing. I've had that before, where I've got about halfway. I think I'm writing a play about, I don't know, whatever it is about. You think you're writing a play about the Middle East, and you suddenly realise you're writing a play about dads. It's sort of and then I think you have to probably have to listen to the play, because I think it probably means, as much as you want to be the playwright who writes the sort of genre the epoch defining play about the Middle East and sorts it all out, you may not be that playwright. You may be the playwright that writes a really good play about dads, and that's fine. You know what I mean? There's nothing wrong with that.
And tell me more about this listen to the play, because I think I know what you mean, but you know, for somebody who's never written a play, they might think that sounds quite mental. What does it what do you mean by that?
Well, I think there's a mental way of explaining it and a more logical, and I'll probably give you both because, and you know, people can take the fucking pick. It's up to them, isn't it? But I think the mental way is I sort of think that plays need a sort of, I do think that plays kind of have oddly, they sort of need a soul, you know, they need to sort of be alive, you know, and I don't think they really need a soul. I don't really believe that plays can have a soul, you know, but I think in some way they should. I sort of believe that as well, you know, and I think you can write a play that feels like that looks like it's got all the right parts, but in its guts it hasn't got, there's not something living and breathing inside it, you know. I think the more sort of logical way of thinking about it is that the most interesting part of you is not your conscious mind. The most interesting part of any person, in fact, that you know, we think that we are the things we, you know, we think that we control ourselves. We believe that we control who we are and our image of who we are. And, you know, I think a thing like this, and therefore you must think that I think a thing like this. But if I don't really think that, you will absolutely know that I'm only saying that for pretense's sake. You know what I mean? I'm not really saying that for truth, because humans are just machines for working out what other human beings think, you know. And I think that unconscious part of your mind is the stuff you want to access. It's not really unconscious, that's wrong, or subconscious even. It's just that there are processes going on that are deeper than what are in the front of your brain, what you think you're thinking about, you know, because we're always fooling ourselves. We always, you know, we think, oh, I'm going to write a play because, you know, I need to write this play about whatever it is because it needs to be written. And actually you're not doing that really. You're doing it because you want the commission, or you're doing it because, you know, you think someone will, you know, or you think it would be cool if you do that, or you think all of this, you know. So actually the sort of stuff that's in the front of your mind is not interesting. The stuff that's somewhere in the back of your mind is much more interesting. And I think what happens is once you start writing that play, if you're doing what you should be doing as a writer, I believe what you should be doing, which is to try and write honestly, you should soon see in the play, the play will sort of find its own way, and you'll be able to jump on that and go with it. That sounds a bit esoteric still, doesn't it?
No, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, certainly that thing that plays have their own momentum and their own life, and there's a bit of you that's kind of following that a bit and trusting it. But you said,
I apologise for how shitty my office is, by the way, because I realised that this is being recorded. I hadn't really clocked that this is being recorded, of course, because I'm a moron, and you did tell me. So anyone watching this, I'd like to, you know, officially apologise for the broken door handle. I broke my door handle the other day, and all this junk, all this there. Had I had any sort of self-awareness, I would have tidied up. I haven't.
I'll just put my books in.
Just put your books in the background, and everything will be fine. Or maybe some sort of Hawaiian island.
I can do that. You said that when you kind of got the idea, then you kind of said something like sometimes what you would then do is sort of going around, and I think you said sort of gathering up the bits and pieces that will help you write it. What kind of things do you do between having the idea that you think, oh yeah, I think there's a play here, and let's say actually writing it?
Sometimes you don't do anything. Sometimes I think you just feel like you've got to go, you know. Sometimes you think you've got to, you know, you can feel it, and you can feel, and sometimes, and then other times you need to, you know, there's some plays that do need a bit of research, you know. I'm not a huge research writer, which I think in some ways is a flaw, you know. I think, but I do a bit of research, but I've always found whenever I do research, I end up putting, I can't help but spit it into the play. I vomit a load of it into the play, and it stops the play being kind of, it stops that sort of life in the play sometimes, for me anyway, for the way I write, you know. So I suppose my stuff is, I'm never really going to, I probably aren't the right writer to write, you know, a defining play about the NHS, you know what I mean? There's other writers out there that would do that a hell of a lot better than I would, you know. But I think you've got to kind of find, yeah, you've got to do, you know, you'll probably need to do a bit of research, and just, you know, you do need to make sure that the things you're saying are true, you know. That's one thing you could sort of pull into your, but the other thing that you need to find often are characters. Sometimes they're just there waiting for you, and sometimes you need to work a bit harder on them, you know. I'm not one, I never really know that much about my characters. Like, I don't subscribe to sort of like, you know, you know, working out characteristics of them, you know. I feel that my view on this, I suppose, and I know other writers that do, and that's works for them, but my view on it is, you know, if you're on a bus and you hear two people behind you talking, the amount of information you take in from that, just you know, just from their voice is colossal, right? We don't really, we're doing it all the time. We're constantly processing this stuff, and we just, you know, we don't have a clue that we're doing it. But you can, even looking at another person, because humans are constantly, all we're doing is signaling to each other who we are, and we're receiving those signals, you know. And so I think most of the information you need can be heard in a person's voice. And, you know, what a person, I often think, even things down to things like jobs. I did a play called Orphans, and I remember the actress, about just before we were about to go, I think it was probably about a week before we were about to go on, said, "What does she do for a living?" And I realized I had no idea. I had absolutely no idea. And I said, "Whatever you want, really, you know," and or within a range of certain things, like, you know, if you make her an astronaut, that's going to fuck the play up. But, you know, and so I think, you know, some plays you need more information about that character than others. Girls and Boys, I needed a lot of information about that character, and that was a play where I did need to do research, because it was relating to a very real thing that I felt a responsibility to sort of to tell as accurately as I could. But then again, there's also, even with that play, I sort of realized if I went too far with the research, I would just spew it in, you know.
Yes. And I mean, you mentioned Girls and Boys. What would be a sort of opposite example of a play that you got the idea and you pretty much thought, actually, I want to just have at this?
Actually, After the End, and After the End was a play. It was probably about my third play, I think. And I remember I had that idea. I had it in bed. I was lying in bed, and I for some reason wasn't getting up, like a lazy turd. And in between sort of like lying in bed and getting up, I had the entire idea for the play, and thought, I'm just going to write this now, you know. And also, I think it was at a time when I was learning. I was very early on, and my view then was I needed to write loads and loads to try and learn. And I was quite determined to write different types of plays, because I figured I'd find out more about playwriting if I tried to write different types of plays, you know. But that play wasn't really, it didn't take a lot of, it wasn't a play that had a lot of facts in it, you know. There was stuff that I already knew, you know. I'd done lots of research into nuclear fallout shelters for a while, and it's set in a nuclear fallout shelter. I've just been interested in nuclear fallout shelters, and so I kind of found out a lot of stuff. And, you know, there's little factual bits and pieces you need to understand about how, you know, a bomb might go off and things like this, but not by and large. It's just two people in this confined space and how they negotiate each other. You know, arguably, we've all been researching that our entire lives, because we all know people, you know.
Yeah. And I guess also, spoiler alert, because the world outside that play has been actually made up by one of the characters, that also gives you license to kind of not be too accurate.
Not totally accurate, yeah. You want to be a bit accurate, because you don't want the other character to feel. But interestingly, I work in TV and film, and it's quite interesting that there's stuff you can get away with on stage you'll never ever get away with on film, and it's because film is a really literal medium and theatre is not. So if you a good example is I don't think I can say that because I'm working on it right now. You just find that you have to make in a play, you don't, there's all those things that I said, you don't have to make any decisions. You have to do that on film because we're seeing it, you know. So I can write a play and I don't have to decide what time it's in. I can say, this is a play, you know, it's happening. And when someone says, when is this? Is it the 80s? Is it the 90s? I go, you know, maybe it's the 80s, and I don't know. It could be now, it could be the 1890s, maybe put it wherever you want. You can do that with a lot of plays. I mean, that's a very extreme example, but, you know, you don't have to be really concrete. The moment you see something on a screen, it's really, really literal, and you have to be very, very accurate about it, you know. Why did I start talking about screen? Because you asked me a very sensible question that I veered off. And
well, I think I was talking about the fact that you can kind of make it up.
Yeah, you can make it up, and that's sort of like theatre. I think it's something to do with the fact that we're in the theatre and we're locked into what's going on stage. When you're watching it on screen, your mind works in a different way. You know, and I think oddly on screen you figure things out quicker. You know, because you can see all this real stuff, whereas, you know, on stage, you know, we're used to things being not real. Theatre is intrinsically a metaphorical medium, I think, you know. Would
that apply to something like Utopia? So I think of Utopia as not being literal in quite that way, but maybe you're
probably less literal than most, but it's still more literal than theatre. I think most things on screen would be more literal than theatre, and of course it varies. Like some plays are extremely literal, you know, but you can get away with an example. We're doing Matilda at the moment, and, you know, an example is, you know, on stage we have grown-ups playing kids. The moment you do that on film, you just can't. You know, you have to have kids playing kids, or it's suddenly a really big, weird stylistic decision. You know, or you know, you can have. We've had one number's been quite difficult because, you know, it sort of stands outside of that whole piece. But on stage, it's really, really easy because we're used to actors playing different roles. You're not used to that on screen. A person is a person. It's not an actor playing. An actor's never going to go, now I'm playing the teacher, now I'm doing this. Apart from, you know, Eddie Murphy in was it the Flumps, the Nutty Professor, the Flumps. You know, apart from that, which is really, really rare, you know, we don't really have that on screen. You know, when we see that person, we're supposed to believe that person is that person. But on stage, you don't have to do that. You can, you know, we know that that's an actor.
That's interesting, because as soon as you mentioned Matilda, I thought of When I Grow Up.
Yeah.
That song, which actually, in terms of the stage experience, it's a completely transcendent, ravishing moment. It doesn't really it's not located in the story at all.
Not at all, no. It's a really difficult song. And actually that song, you know, it was, at the moment Tim brought it in, it was brilliant. Everyone loved the song, but it was really difficult to place it. And it was sort of, you know, I think it wasn't until quite late on that we put it where we put it, which was it's just as you come back from the interval, and it can work there because you sort of have permission to sort of not start the play. The play hasn't really started yet, you know, the show hasn't started back up. So you've got permission to sort of sit back and, you know, because it's a riff, that song. It's an idea. It's just, you know, and it's not, you know, it's actually possibly the most memorable song there. It's a really beautiful song, but it doesn't sit within the body of the piece, you know. And actually there's been quite a challenge to sort of get it into the film script. I think we've found a way of doing it, but those things suddenly instantly give you challenges because, you know, I think probably, you know, because it's a musical, it's less literal than most films. You know, it's not The Long Good Friday, you know what I mean? It's, you know, it's got people bursting into song all of a sudden, and, you know, it's still going to be quite crazy in places. But even so, it's nowhere near as, you know, you think about that set for Matilda has got flats with kind of Scrabble tile books everywhere. You know, it's totally crazy, you know.
And have there been plays that have had a longer development process? Well, I mean, you said that Girls and Boys, for example, there was a bit of research and a bit of thinking through the character. Have there been plays where you carry around a notebook and you've built it up in some way, or does that not?
Yeah, I've done that, but I've made shit plays then. Oddly, I wrote a play that took me 3 years to write. I thought it was my opus, and it really didn't work. And it didn't work when we did it in the UK, and then they did it in Switzerland, and it didn't work there. They did it in, I think they did it in Frankfurt, it didn't work there. They did it in Munich, and I got booed on stage. You know, it was like, they actually you go up for a bow in Germany, you know, and they actually booed, you know. And at that point I thought, oh, maybe this play doesn't really work as well as I thought it did. But it took me years to write it, and I still love the play in some ways, and I think there's many things that I like in that play, but it doesn't really for me, it took too long. Some writers really, you know, the longer they'll work on it, the better it is. For me, I don't really like to. I'll try and get a first draft of a play done in about a month to 6 weeks, because if I take longer, I'll probably fuck it up. You know, I'll probably fuck it up. And what I sometimes do is, like, if I get to a point where factually I need to make sure it's right, I can put in some placeholder stuff, and then when I finish the play, you know, kind of just check out the research. And, you know, actually, weirdly, you find that a lot of the time you've got some of it right, and then you might look at it and go, that's really, really, that particular person wouldn't feel like that or wouldn't say that. So you rewrite that little bit to sort of accommodate them.
Did you say what the name of the play was that was big?
Oh, it was a play called The God's Weep. It was,
right.
you know, it was a play that absolutely no one liked. It was the audience. It was, you know, it was amazing to see the difference between the audience before and after the interval. There was quite noticeable gaps in the auditorium. You know,
right.
Some people liked it. I've had some people told me they liked it, but majority of people didn't.
And when you kind of say that ideally you'd write a play in like a month, maybe 6 weeks.
Yeah.
In that time, is it quite a disciplined process? Are you tending to write for the same hours every day, or is it more writing as the mood takes you, or how does it work?
No, it's for me, it's not about how the mood, because I think if I wait for the mood, I'll never be in the mood, because you know, it's sort of like, you know, I'm very like, I have to sort of force myself to focus. Like, I don't think I'm a natural, you know, it's not like I write and suddenly there's classical music, you know, and I've got to get this down, I must get this down, you know. It's none of that you know, it really isn't, you know. It's sort of like, sometimes look, I think it's a really enjoyable thing at times, and it's, you know, but sometimes it's really difficult and hard to work things out, and, you know, and if a fly farts in the garden, I'm more interested in that. So I tend to box myself in to make sure that, you know, and I think in the old days, I would be much more disciplined, and once I started, I would work on that thing and just nothing else. But now, because I've got more, I'm spinning more plates, really. It gets harder to find the time to do it the way I would like to do it, you know. But also, one thing I did early on was I write by hand. Weirdly, when I write theatre, I write by hand. Not when I write screen stuff. Weirdly, I still write by hand when I write theatre. And I always made sure that I didn't have a fancy biro, or I always have a shitty biro, not a fancy pen or anything like this. Or, you know, my notepads were like exercise books that you buy from, like, you know, they're like this, you know, this is, yeah, that's one, or things like this, just shitty little exercise books, you know.
Right.
And I made it as shitty as possible, because I didn't want to sort of get into a frame of mind where, you know, I needed my special pen, you know, I needed the muse, I needed the ambience and all of this. And I feel like that in general about writing. I'm better in the morning. I don't like to write in the evening, because I'm a bit knackered by then, but I will do if necessary. And I you know, so I think you can write in various situations, you know. It's good to take the mystery out of it, you know, because it's that, especially when you're starting out, it can feel really kind of weird and mysterious. And when people talk about it, you know, they're often, I don't know, I think people are a bit over pretentious about it all, you know, and it makes it more mysterious than it need be, you know.
And is that what the exercise books and the shitty biro are about? That, you know, treating it as just, there's nothing special going on here.
Yeah, that's it. Not making it too, you know, not making it too sort of special or mystical or anything like that. Just reminding yourself you don't need to wait for the magic, because that if you do that, you're in real fucking trouble. I think you actually writing is something you do. It's not something that kind of happens to you. And a lot of the time it's about sitting down and just, it's about getting ink on the paper. That's the most important thing with writing. Nothing else matters. And there's so much stuff that everyone talks about with writing, and like, who you've got to talk to and who your contacts you've got to have and all this sort of stuff. And I actually think the nice thing about writing, if you're a director, it's quite difficult because directors need to somehow convince people they can do things. You don't have to do that as a writer. You just got to write something.
Yeah.
You just put it on the page. And if it goes on the page, I mean, because you read tons of scripts, but if it goes on the page and if it works, then it will pique people's interest, and I mean, that's a terrifying thing because we often like to sort of think, the reason this isn't working is because, I don't know the right people, or I haven't got the right contacts, or, people don't get me. It is possible that's true, but it's probably not likely, because that's, there are some people whose writing is so fucking out there, like someone like Sarah Kane comes along and people don't recognize how amazing she is. That said, people did in the end, didn't they? So, I think it's a comforting thing that you don't have to do lots of other bullshitty things. You just have to put stuff on the page. Everything should be what goes on the page. That's the important thing. But it's also slightly scary as well.
And how do you hold in your head both that thought that it's just a kind of job, it's just putting words down the page, and then the thing you were saying earlier about sort of tending to the soul of the play, following where the play's going?
Sorry, that's so rude. There we go. Sorry about that. But well, I think, yeah, you're right. Those things are really fucking contradictory. I think the process of doing it is something that you sit down and you work it out, and you sit down and I mean, what I quite like to do is, sit and think for a while. Just have a good old think. I'm thinking is writing. I mean, everything is, I actually believe everything is writing. What we're doing now is writing. When you're, making dinner, you're probably writing in some kind of way, because, the actual bit where you put ink on the paper is the tip of the iceberg. Everything that you think and feel and experience is it should be, is somehow going into your play, and you often meet playwrights, and, you can sort of you can see them in the play, because there's some of you in that play, and but I think when you're sort of sitting down to kind of write, it is just about sort of, it's about getting those things down to the best of your ability at that time. Once it's down, you can then step back and look and hope that it kind of lives, but I don't think you can do that in the moment. I think in the moment, the only thing I think you can do is to try and be honest. I think that's the only thing you can do. You can't write good plays. If you could write good, we'd all be writing good all the fucking time. You know what I mean? It'd be amazing to know your favorite playwrights have written bad plays. You know what I mean? We've all written bad plays, and it's, if you knew how to write good, if there was a way of writing good, you'd do it, but there isn't. So you can't write good, but what you can do is write honest. You can try and write honest, which is you can try and write genuinely the things that you're thinking of and the things that you believe, and and I think if you've done that, then later on, when you look at it, it's got a chance of having life in it. It's got a chance of being an honest living thing,
Can I ask you a bit more about the handwriting thing? Because I think that's really interesting, because you could type in a kind of casual sort of way. Do you think do you write faster than you type? Is it something about finding the medium that it matches the speed at which you think, or?
No, what I think it is. It's like, I think it was how I started writing, and I started writing. The first thing I ever wrote was probably 1990 fucking 6 or something, and I didn't know how to type. I'd never touched a typewriter in those days. So, and obviously, I later on that was different, partly it's that, it's just what I got used to. And also it's more comfortable. Like just sitting with a notepad in a corner of the room, you're sitting in an armchair, it's really easy. It's actually more comfortable than sitting with a laptop, because a laptop is like this, you know. But the other thing I think is, I think I keep doing it because I feel like theatre is quite rhythmic. Like, and I believe that theatre dialogue, the theatre I like, feels rhythmic. And what rhythm does is it's not about the ear, it's about the body. You know, when you think about a stage, you know, if you're, I don't know, you're in the Olivier, you know, you can't afford the really good seats, you're at the back. What you're looking at is really about that big. It's fucking tiny, you know, you're not looking at something very large. And theatre when it started out, it was huge fucking amphitheatres, you know. So you need a way of getting that information to the back of the auditorium, and it's in the body. And rhythmic language inhabits the body, I think. So, you know, you're much more likely to sort of be expressive with your body if the language has a musicality to it. And I think, and you don't want that on screen, by the way. That's awful on screen, like really rhythmic, musical. It just, you know, you think, oh my God, because screen is like this. You know, you go to a cinema and it's like you're in the fucking thing. You've got all this sound and you know, this thing starting over there and shooting over there, and you know, it's just you could imagine a Marvel film written with you know, Martin Crimp's sort of rhythm. It would be too much. You'd be going, fucking hell, you know, or Debbie Green. You know, it'd just be like you couldn't listen to it, you know. So you don't want that on screen, but on stage it's beautiful, you know. On stage it sort of allows the actor to sort of be physical, you know. You don't need that physicality on screen because the camera can be right here. You can be right. You're so close to the person, you know. And so I think writing is a long-winded way of saying I think that writing by hand probably feels a bit easier to be rhythmic. It feels a bit easier to be sort of. It allows a little bit more musicality because, you know, it's a physical motion as opposed to just your fingers, which is of course it's a physical motion, but it's very, you know, it's doing that, you know.
Yeah. And when you're writing the dialogue, let's say, in your head, are you imagining real people in a real situation, i.e. the fictional characters in a real situation, or are you imagining actors speaking the lines on stage?
I think I'm imagining the real people, which is odd because often I've written a few things that couldn't exist in real life. Girls and Boys is a good example. Yeah. Girls and Boys cannot exist in real life. And in fact, if you try and make it real, there's a thing that happens at the beginning of you know, the beginning of the play cannot exist if she's at the end of the play and say it's a year later, or she's telling the story, the beginning of the play can't possibly work. It can't possibly work because the person who she's talking about, she would feel very, very differently to than she. So, you know, we realized early on that the play, if you sort of apply the laws of space-time and physics to it, you end up in a really it just doesn't work, you know. And so, but even then, it's in a really strange way. Even then, when it's a person who's talking to an audience, I hear a real person when I'm writing it. I don't see an actor doing that. I don't see a stage. I'm not very visual, actually. I don't really tend to sort of see things. That I vaguely see things, not, you know, I kind of have a vague geography, but I hear things very clearly. Like I hear the voices very clearly.
Yes. And the handwriting, is that the first draft, or would you redraft on the page, or at that point when does it transfer to a computer?
Both, really. I mean, another thing that's good about writing by hand is that there's a mini rewrite when you put it on screen. So because you've got to get it, you know, you can't give people a fucking, especially my spidery writing. My problem with writing by hand, by the way, is that I've got such bad handwriting I cannot always read what I've written. And so you know, and I write in different books as well, and it all sort of becomes this crazy fucking mess where I've written like fucking bits that kind of like, you know, I mean, look, it's just like just fucking chaos, you know what I mean? That's an example of like bits going up here, you know, and it's sort of like but so I've got to translate that into something people can read, and actually there's a mini edit there, you know, there's a mini sort of like there's a moment where you can go through it again, and then when I might then choose to, like, if I'm just doing a little bit of tinkering, I'll do that on screen. But if I've got to write a new scene or a new speech or something, then I'll go back to writing in a way I'm more comfortable with, really.
And I'm asking everybody this, but when you do convert it to computer, what font do you use?
I think I use Times New Roman. I think I'm really boring. I think I don't use Arial. Everyone uses that. I don't use that. I don't use Courier New. I do not approve of seeing a play in Courier New. I just don't. Film script, of course, but a play in Courier New, I don't like it. Do you write yours in Courier New?
I do use Courier, yeah.
There you go.
But you know what? I think it's a little bit like your shitty notebook thing, because I think it looks very kind of just like, it doesn't look printed. It doesn't look published.
No,
it looks original.
Oh, that's true. I suppose what I feel about it, because maybe it's because I write screen, and because you have to write. You have that, if you're writing on screen, you're writing in final draft, which is just good. You don't have a choice. You have to write, but partly because screen is, everything is, a page translates as roughly a minute, and people need to know that shit.
Yeah. Rewriting. So how do you approach that? And I suppose I remember you telling me quite a long time ago that you felt it was something like, you said you felt you only really became a playwright when you learned how to rewrite. It was something like that, you said.
Quite grand, isn't it? It's quite a grand thing. I bet it wasn't quite as I probably swore while I was saying it, didn't I?
I'm sure you did. I've obviously censored that. But could you say something about that? Because playwrights, when they start out, often hate rewriting, and it's
fucking awful. But it is the thing that makes the difference. Like, it is the one thing it's the most important thing. And I actually, it can be a real comfort rewriting, because you realise that when you write a first draft, that's not going to go on unless you're really, really fucking lucky, But generally, first drafts don't. That thing that you've written doesn't tend to go on, I mean, they can do, it can be you just write it and you nail it, But things tend to get rewritten. And someone once told me that Hemingway said the first draft of anything is shit. And, he wrote a few good things, So, like, I think rewriting can be a really valuable thing. It depends. Like, some writers don't like to rewrite as much. Some people get that idea, I mean, I think it's the thing that kind of, for most people, can be. I mean, Pinter didn't rewrite, did he? He just fucking wrote it and that was it. But he was Pinter, wasn't he? But I think, for most people, for most writers, it's the bit where you can look at what you've got and you can sort of digest it, and then you can sort of find a way to make it what you want it to be. Because what you've written and what you want to have written are not always the same things, And there's something I try and sort of say to younger writers when they're starting out, is that, especially when you're starting out right at the beginning, is like, as humans, we have this set of tools that we've developed for understanding stories, whether it's film, whether it's TV, whether it's theatre, or whether it's just a story, that someone told you, we've got this set of tools for understanding them and judging them, and critiquing them, and we do it all the time. We watch a TV show and we go, I didn't really like the ending, or character arcs are a bit sort of, I don't fucking really, or God, that's so derivative, blah, blah, blah. What you've got to remember as a writer is that those tools, they're fantastic for everything else. They're completely fucking useless for your work. You cannot use those tools for your work, because your work is different. You have a different relationship to your work, and it's something that I've seen it stop writers. I've seen it stop emerging writers, and it stops them from ever taking that next step, which you want to take when you're starting out. From, it's all about if you can take that next step to actually sort of writing, being not just writing, but really sort of being a writer that people want to do your work, And this can stop people because they can't see that work as it is. They're only seeing it through, and they'll often look at other things and they go, okay, a fucking play by so and so, that fucking play by Dan Revellato, that weren't any good. You know, that play by Dennis Kelly was fucking shit. I saw that last week. Rubbish. My plays are better than that. You know, but the truth is your plays might not be because, you know, you're looking at them, you don't know because you can't see them properly, and other people are able to see them. And really what you want to be able to do is, the most important thing is to see your play as it is, not as you want it to be, or not as you hope it is, as it really is. Oh, it's lightning out here now. It's going to get very dramatic. See your play as it is. Can you hear that? Dun, dun, dun. Sound effects. See your play as it is, people.
I mean, that's interesting then, because in terms of the sort of rules that people talk about how you should construct a story, how do you avoid that in film? Because the film world, from my very limited experience of it, is a bit more enthralled to the beat sheet, to story, to the three acts and all that stuff. Do you go with that a bit in film, or?
I don't really, to be honest with you. I'm not really interested in, I mean, you know, if I'm working with a director who wants to sort of do a beat sheet, I mean, film and TV are quite different for a start. Film, the way I look at it is, if you get the blame, you should get to say how it works. And basically, if you're making a film, I mean, people don't know who wrote films, you know, people have got no idea who wrote films, but you know who directed the films, you know what I mean? And that, so the directors take the blame, and I think it's fair enough that directors get to call the shots, and, you know, it's their gig really, you know. TV is a bit more different from that. I think TV, as a writer, you'll get the blame, and I think writers are a bit more, it's more like theatre, where it's kind of considered a writer's medium, you know. And actually these things are very arbitrary, by the way. I think there's not much sense in why, you know, actually a really good director on TV is just as important as a really good director on film. And a really good writer on film is, you know, just as good as important on film. But it's just the way it is. In theatre, I think, you know, in theatre, again, the playwrights often get the blame. I mean, it's just different, depends on what it is. So I think you should have a say in how it goes. I mean, if I'm working on a film with a director and they want to do a beat sheet or a treatment, I used to really hate all that stuff. I've got to sort of understand that it can have value now. I think it can have value to sort of sketch things out, and certainly in TV it can have value because it can, you know, these series can be very, very. It's very hard sometimes to hold the thing in your own head. Also, you've got to realise you're working with a lot of other people, and a lot of the time some of this stuff is for them, and it's really tempting to sort of go, just fucking trust me, I'll write it, but they don't. They're not going to trust you. Why are they going to fucking trust you? Like, why are they going to trust anyone? Like, their jobs are on the line, you know, or they're putting in millions and millions of dollars into this film, you know. Why the fuck are they? They're not going to trust anyone, you know. So I think you have to look at it from that perspective. I mean, things like the 3-act structure and all that sort of stuff, I've never been interested in it, and I've never read a book about it. I don't really know any of this sort of stuff. I think, I mean, what I've heard about it, like, you know, things like Story by Robert McKee, whatever that thing is, I've never really, you know, I think I instinctively know what an inciting incident is, but I've never learned it. And I think, you know, I think you could probably, these things aren't like the laws of physics, you know, they're just methods that people have come to make what they think is a good film. And for every good film that has been made using these methods, they'll always trawl out, you know, Star Wars or Jaws or something like this. You could bring out a fucking shit ton of bad films. You could bring out so many bad films. They've used exactly the same method and have come up with, you know, bollocks. But no one says that, you know. No one says Battlefield Earth used this system, because everyone knows it's a terrible fucking film, you know.
And so to take you back to stage plays then, you wouldn't, what do you know before you start actually drafting in that kind of month to 6 week period? Have you sketched out in any way the shape of the whole thing, or what do you know and what don't you know?
It's like I say, it's different with different plays. For me, I've got to remind myself that I don't need to know everything, because what I can do is, I think there's a thing that happens when you're worried about these things, and it's always a bit scary writing, you know. It's always, you know, so you're putting you're fucking putting your soul out there, really. You know what I mean? You're sort of putting all your thoughts out there, and you put them out there for a load of strangers to read, and then a load of strangers to say, and then a load of strangers to come in and watch, and then a load of strangers to write about. It's a weird thing to do, but I don't know. I've lost my thread again. This is definitely this is lockdown doing this. I'd like to say, normally I'm fucking always on the ball. It's just about lockdown.
Well, it might be easier to think to ask it about a specific.
What do I know?
Yeah. So, I mean, what about a play that you know of yours that I really love, Love and Money?
Yeah.
That seems to be a play. Well, actually, I don't know. I would imagine you would have to have planned a bit of that, but maybe
No, I wrote the opening monologue of that, and I didn't know anything else about it. And what the opening monologue is it's done via emails, and it's a man who is in contact with this new woman who he's really excited about. She's French, she's English. They've just fallen for each other. They're kind of falling for each other, and he's very coy about stuff. And she sort of encourages him to tell this, and he's kind of really kind of amazed at her sort of, braveness at sort of saying this. And in the end, he tells her the total truth about what he did, which is he talks about his ex-partner and how she died. And you actually find out that he played a role in that. She killed herself, but then he didn't, because they've been going through such a bad time and got into debt, he allowed that to happen. He then, in fact, he when she still didn't die, he got some pills, he got some vodka, he helped you really, and of course that woman never wants to speak to him ever again, what I found out, but when I got to the end of that scene, I realized that he had killed I don't quite think murdered, but he had helped and abetted the suicide of this woman. It was clear that he had once loved this woman very much, and it was also clear that he probably wasn't a bad person, So the rest of the play was about understanding that, understanding the person who he killed and what she was like and how their relationship had grown. And it was also about understanding him and understanding that he was a good person. So that's why the play sort of moves back and forth. It doesn't quite go backwards. People think it goes backwards. It jumps around in time, but also it's slightly formally different every time you come to a new scene. They're often, they feel a little bit different from the one that was before. That was the idea.
Yes. And well, actually, let's talk about Girls and Boys, which I have my prop here.
Very good.
I suppose the first thing I should say is if anybody's watching this, it's very difficult to talk about this play without spoilers. So pause this video, go and read it, then come back, and now we can talk about Girls and Boys.
That's a good thing to do, because then we can talk about it properly.
Yeah. So where did this start?
I heard the phrase family annihilation, and I thought it was just an abomination as a phrase. I just thought it was a terrible, so a family annihilator is a person, usually a man, I think about 90% of them are men, who wipe out their entire family. So, they'll kill the children and often kill the partner, but sometimes they leave the partner alive. But we've all heard these stories, and but when I heard this phrase, family annihilator, it just stayed with me, that it just, to actually annihilate people just feels kind of so dark, and that sort of stayed with me. And I think at the same time, this character sort of began to sort of swirl around, and that character was someone who it was a woman who was working class. I think because I'd met she works in a similar industry to ours. She ends up working in media and stuff. And I think I'd met some sort of really. I've been very lucky. I've worked with some really amazing women in media. Very few of them have been working class, and there's very few people, to be honest, that are working class in those sort of environments, and it just sort of, she started emerging, this character that, it felt like it was important to sort of write that person, and then these things married up, and at the beginning it started as a version of Medea, but the idea was it was swapped round, and I think in the first draft it was much more clear that was what was going on. And actually it was Lindsay Turner who in the end directed it. I only showed the play to Lindsay, I'd met her and I just thought she was pretty amazing, and then I just showed her this play and said, what do you think, and she was great, and I think it was her that sort of kind of veered me away from the whole Medea thing, because actually the Medea thing felt like, what I didn't like about it was like, I think this person deserves their own play, you know what I mean? They don't need to sort of, it kind of annoys me that, when you have to sort of understand another human through the sort of lens of Greek tragedy, well, why not understand a person now, and there I was doing it myself, and also I'd seen Gary Owen's Iphigenia at Splot, which is brilliant. And in that play, there's a sort of a similar sort of thing where there's this trick on the play, but it absolutely sort of works, and there's a reason for it. And I realised when I saw it, there was no reason for the trick in my play. It was just a trick. It was just like, oh, Medea is the man, And it just felt like, I'm not interested in that anymore. So that was a starting off point, And I suppose in some ways Medea probably gave it a little bit of a structure, but not hugely. I mean, I didn't particularly, I don't think I even reread Medea when I started the play. It wasn't a version of Medea. It was just somewhere in the back of my mind that was knocking around. And of course, Medea is a family annihilator.
Yes.
That's exactly what she does,
Was it always a monologue or from how early?
Yeah,
it was a monologue.
It was a monologue. It was always a monologue. And I'm not entirely sure why. One reason I know is that my ex-wife is an actress, and a very good actress in Italy, and she kept telling me that I needed to write her a monologue. And I think it stayed in my head. And but that wasn't the reason. I mean, you don't write a play because someone you're married to wants you to write a play. But I think it just sort of stayed in my head. I wanted a play that was, I knew the play was going to be about male violence. That's what the play is ultimately about. It's really about that. I think it's about why are we, we are intensely violent. Men are very, very violent. I mean, not all men, and I'm not a violent man, I don't think, but I think I could be, and I don't think you're a violent man, but I think you could be. I think we all could be, and I think even though not all men are violent, enough men are violent to make the statement men are violent true. And, it's something like the prison population, I think it's only about 5% female, it's very small percentage. I mean, there are other reasons for that apart from women don't commit crime, but the largest one is that women don't commit the kind of crimes that men do. Nearly all sex crimes are committed by men, but in huge numbers. 91% of murders are committed by men. Family annihilators, nearly all men. Men are just much more violent. But what's sort of strange is that it's not, and that's not saying that women aren't violent. Women can be violent. It's just that men are. When a woman is violent, we all kind of go. When we see an example of a violent woman, we go, oh my God, look, a violent woman. You see, women are violent, but we just gloss over all the kind of the swathe of brutality that is committed in our towns and cities every fucking weekend by violent men, and much, much worse than that. So that's what I kind of wanted to write about that. I wanted to write about, violence that is in me somewhere as well. I think because violence is in every male, I think it's there, and so it then felt that it was right to write it from the point of view of a woman. It felt, I think writing that from, I also didn't really want to write his point of view either. I wasn't interested in his point of view.
Right.
I wasn't interested in why I wasn't interested in why this man murders his kids. Fuck him. You know what I mean? I'm not interested in, really, I felt very, very sort of strident about that. I felt like I don't want to sort of figure out what it was, you know what I mean? I mean, I think I'm wrong there, by the way. I think I probably should be more interested in that. But another part of me, you know, just goes, no, it's not. It's, you know, it's her story. You know, it's her story. It's, you know, even though it's about male violence, it is her story. And largely, you know, for the majority of the play, she's not a victim. It's very important for the play that she isn't a victim. You know, she's, because what happens is we tend to think of a person who that has happened to as victims, and they're not. There's, you know, victims are just, they're us that some really shit thing has happened to, and the moment that we think of them as a victim, we change who they are. We change our perception of them. We colour them in a slightly different way, you know. And it was really important that never happened in the play. She's not a victim until the end of the play, anyway. You know, it doesn't really happen right to the very end. You know. Yeah. It's a long-winded way of answering whatever it was you asked me, but.
Can I ask about, you kind of make a decision, you don't name her as a character. She's a kind of dash, and she's listed in the kind of program text at the roll call. It's just performer Carey Mulligan. Was there something deliberate about not wanting to specify her?
Yeah, I don't know what it is. I think it's hard to say why I didn't name her. You know, I think it wasn't that she doesn't deserve a name. It wasn't that she should remain nameless or anything like that, or she represents something. It's just that, you know, when you think of yourself, you don't think of yourself as Dan. When I think of myself, I don't think of myself as Dennis. I'm just inside, you know, we're inside myself, you know. In fact, I've got such a stupid name. It surprises me that I'm called Dennis. And when I say I'm called Dennis, it's like, oh, fuck. That's my fucking name. You know, I've had that for quite a while, that name. And so it didn't feel like, it never felt right to suddenly give her a name. And so I ended up avoiding giving her a
name. And the title of the play, when did the title come to you and so on? Do you remember when that happened? Or?
Yeah, I had a load of bad titles. I really struggled with that one. And then it just suddenly, I realised it was about, and it just suddenly, I think I just wrote a list, because you know, if I really struggle for a title, I end up writing lists of things that it should, you know, and some of those lists some of those things are terrible. You'd never tell anyone. And then I think this just ended up on a list, you know, and then I sort of saw it again and thought, oh, that's it. It's about those two kids, you know, because that's really what it's about. It's about girls and boys, and you know, it's about the, you know, when she talks to her kids, and when she sees her kids, the boy is always running around smashing things, and you know, the girl is not doing that. The girl is probably playing in a more creative way, you know. And you know, I'm from a family of five. There are five of us. I've got two brothers. I've got two sisters. So there was 3 girls, 2 boys, and that was my experience as a child. Was that we went around, you know, playing soldiers and killing things, you know. And when you stop and think about that, that's a bit fucked up. That's a bit, the desire to kill things, it's so strong in little boys. It's just so strong. And I'm not saying that, I have no idea. And I don't think the play has an idea whether is suggesting that this is a genetic thing or is a societal thing or whatever. I don't think the play is suggesting either of that. I'm just putting it forward as a fact. I mean, this is the way this is the way it is with a lot of kids.
Right. And of course, we've been describing it as a monologue, and it is a monologue. But of course, it also has the scenes with the children, if you see what I mean. When did they start emerging? Was that also quite early in the idea, or what?
They actually, weirdly, they were part of a play that I never finished. Or the first scene was like, I wrote a play, and in that play, the little girl and she was talking to her father actually, and it was just this thing about a bucket of mud. You know, she was coming in with a bucket of mud, and the dad was going, "What's that you've got?" And she's going, "A bucket of mud." And he's going, "A bucket of mud? You're bringing a bucket of mud into my house?" "No, you're not bringing a bucket of mud." And she goes out, she comes back with another bucket of mud, and she goes, "It's a bucket of earth." You know, and it was just that sort of thing, you know. And the play never really worked, you know. It never really you know, something. I wrote a few scenes and it didn't really work, but I love that little scene. I like that exchange, and so I just nicked it. And gave it to her without. I mean, I rewrote it for her, you know, and I gave it to her without. You know, I mean, I stole the kid. I think the you know, and she spoke very differently from the guy who was originally doing it, you know, but I think once I put it in, I realized I still didn't want there to be other characters in there. You know, I knew it would be her doing it. And it's a strange thing to do, because I think when you're first watching the play, she has to mime having a kid, which is a bit shit. Like it's a bit, I mean, she did it brilliantly, and, you know, we had movement directors and everyone, but actually miming, like even miming, making tea looks a bit shit, you know? And we kind of kept thinking, we thought, is this going to be a bit shit? Like she's going to pretend to talk to someone who's not there. Is that just going to be really bad? And I think when you first watch it, you had the first monologue, and then you see her pretending someone's there who isn't there. And your first instinct is to go, fucking hell, really? Is that what we're going to do now? But then she just carries on and does it. And I think after a little while, you just believe that the kid is there, you know, especially because I think Carrie was so good. She was so sort of, you know, she just made it feel, I just felt those kids were real, you know. And in a weird way, not having them there, I mean, it has a function later on in the play, because we then realise, we find out at a certain moment that, you know, she turns and says to the audience, I know they're not here, by the way, you know, I know my kids are dead, you know. And so you realise that she's sort of, that thing is part of a process of her purifying the memories, expunging her memories of her partner who killed her kids, you know. Yeah. But it also, I think that was that felt like, you know, once that started happening, it felt, I mean, that idea of purifying memories didn't come until quite a lot later, actually. It was sort of, it wasn't like that was always there, you know, that came a little bit later.
Because and I wanted to ask you about that moment, actually, you know, which, because my experience seeing it at the Royal Court was that, you know, I mean, Carey Mulligan is really funny, unexpectedly funny, and then basically the first hour is almost like a kind of stand-up comedy act.
And she was incredible,
gales of laughter, and then she has that thing where, as you say, she says, I know they're not here, by the way. I mean, it's not like I think they're actually here. I know they're not. I know they're not here. I know they're dead. And it was like, honestly, it was like they had sucked the air out of the Royal Court, and nobody laughed again for the rest of the play.
Yeah, that's right.
And of course, it is, I think it's, I mean, it felt like a very deliberate thing of going, you think this is a theatrical convention, and actually it's a different theatrical convention.
Yeah.
Realizing that is what suddenly turns everything. Did you have a clear sense that you wanted it to be funny, and then just, well, there's the Medea remnant, I suppose, of going, oh, and now we are on a conveyor belt towards tragedy.
Yeah. Well, I didn't think it was going to be as funny as it was. Like, I mean, I think, you know, I thought, oh, this feels kind of funny. I mean, I never would write funny deliberately. Things, even when I wrote a comedy with Sharon Horgan called Pulling years ago, and even then even though it was on the, it was a comedy, we never really wrote. I don't really remember trying to write laughs. You know what I mean? But it sort of things tend to come out a bit like that. But I didn't realise that it was going to be that funny. And I think that largely that is down to Carey. I mean, who fucking knew? I mean, because she's done quite serious roles up to that moment. But as you say, it felt like there were nights where it felt like a stand-up gig. It felt like she was really bringing the house down, you know. And then I did think that some of the, weirdly, and I know this is wrong now, but I did think that some of the humour would carry on into the rest of the play. And of course, and sometimes it did. You know, there were moments later on where you could get a bit of a laugh, and she'd say something that was a bit sort of funny. But I thought it would, and actually I think that moment happened a little bit earlier in the original draft. I think it was Lindsay that said, you know, you've got to have this, you know that no one's ever going to laugh again once you say that. I was like, but then when you see it, you kind of go, oh, fuck. No, you're not going to laugh again, you know. And it's true, it becomes very difficult to sort of, once you realise that the characters that, because I think by the time she says it, you know, she was so fantastic at embodying. I mean, she has 2 kids herself, Lindsay, you know, that are similar, a boy and a girl, you know, and they were a bit younger, but not much younger. And I think she really just embodied those kids. You just, you know, it's just, I mean, I love the way theatre can do that. You know, there's no one there, but we believe in them. And you're right, absolutely right. At first we kind of go, I think at first we go, what the fuck is going on? Then after a while we go, okay, I'm going to go with this. And by the time we get to the fact where she says they're not here, we've forgotten that they're not there. You know, we actually sort of think we have projected human beings into those spaces. And, you know, so when we find out they're dead, it does feel quite dramatic. It feels like quite a loss.
And of course, one of the things that makes that work as well, I mean, certainly made it work in the production, was the design, because we suddenly reveal this meticulously recreated kind of beautiful home, but it kind of looked, I'm not sure exactly what the effect was meant to be, but it felt like it had been deep frozen or something. There was a kind of weird frosting on it, and it's all kind of one color. And the question for you though is, how far, when writing this or when writing any of your plays, do you kind of think, oh, that's going to be a problem for the designer or the director?
Oh no, I never worry about stuff like that. I just think, you know, that's their job, you know. And also, I mean, I don't mean that in a kind of casual way. I just think if you're lucky enough to work with really good people, and you know, Ez is amazing. She's a really just fucking amazing designer. They'll overcome those problems. I mean, you have to sort of be a bit involved in it, because you can end up with design that gets in the way of the play. But really good designers tend not to do that. Really good designers, you know, they like, hopefully they like the play and they understand, you know, the thing you're trying to do. And we knew that, you know, design was important here. The fear would be that you would look at that and you would think that's a place where ghosts live, but actually it never felt like that. It felt like a stylistic design, a stylistic choice. But once you knew that the kids weren't there, it felt, you know, that was what the place was like. But also she did this very clever thing, which, you know, she made this meticulous living room. This was only for the kids scenes, not for the monologues. That, you know, she did this meticulous design. All these, every single book, you know, and every single teacup on there was then projected in color over the top of it. So you just get this blink of a flash, and people wouldn't quite understand how it happened. It was a projection, you know, and it looked like suddenly the whole thing had gone to color and then just zoomed back in as the scenes were going up and down. You know, it's really clever.
Last question. So you've been writing plays for 25 years, something like that, certainly 20 years, getting them on professionally. What have you learnt?
No, not 20 years.
Well,
no, yeah. I mean, my first was 2003, I think. So I think.
Okay, 17 years.
Nearly 20 years, you're right.
What have you learnt? What do you think you think you can do now that 17 years ago you wouldn't have known how to do?
Oh, that's a really hard question, isn't it? I think lots of things, lots of sort of things to do with structure and character, and, you know, just how you put these things together. Loads and loads of that stuff. I'm not sure any of it matters that much. You know, I think, you know, if you writing an honest play and not knowing how to write it is just as good as writing a you know, a really well structured thing. And I think what can be very difficult for playwrights is they write a play and then they come to write the second play and they've got no fucking idea how to do it, you know, because the first one's written on instinct. And they can be really good, those plays. They can be, you know, we have a great tradition in this country of playwrights writing brilliant first plays, and sometimes they never write a play as good as that again, you know. And it can be hard. It can be very hard for the playwright, because you just don't know how you did that. Now you've got a lot of people looking at you waiting to write, or paying you money even waiting to write, you know. But God, I don't know what I've learned really. that's really terrible, isn't it? Probably just to get on with it a bit.
I think
I think you've got to get on with it. I think the honesty thing, I think I've probably learned a bit more. I think I've sort of drilled down on that the longer I've gone on, and I found it when I started out. I wrote play after play after play after play, and partly that was because I was incredibly prolific, and I think partly that was because I wanted to learn. I was really hungry to learn how to write, and I still am, actually. I still think that when I sit down to write, I try and write something I haven't written before, because that keeps me sort of interested. But also, I think I had lots of things to say. It's not that I don't have lots of things to say anymore, but I've said a few of them, and I kind of don't want to say the thing I've once said. So now I write theatre a lot less, because I think, not because I have any less of a love for it. I just totally not true. I totally do, but I totally do. God, what a fucking way to speak. But I completely do have, I still love theatre as much as I always did, but I also believe I want to write plays when I've got something to say, something that sort of matters. If that means I don't write a play for a while, I'll wait. The world doesn't need me to write a play, but what I think the world probably does need is, it needs playwrights that write about the things that they care about more than anything else in the world. And if you can't quite find out what that is, sometimes you've got to search a bit harder. I don't know. That's nowhere near answering your question about what have I learned. But I think things that what I've learned is that the things that are important aren't the mechanical things of like structure, character, blah blah blah, dialogue. All these things matter, but they aren't really what makes people interested in your work, or they aren't really what makes your work worth people's interest. I think the things that do that are really how you think as a person.
I think that's a great answer. And
is it though? You've got to say that, can't you? Have you ever turned around to someone and gone, "I think that's a shit answer," because you try a bit harder?
That's a shit answer. Can you try a bit harder? There's a first time for everything.
I'm not good. What are you going to do? You're in another room somewhere. It's not like you can do anything.
You wait till lockdown's over.
Oh, come on.
Anyway, Dennis, thank you so much. That was really kind, very generous. Thank you for your time. And I look forward to seeing you.
You've got to do an official goodbye here, haven't you? I was about to ask you how your family is. You don't want all that on tape. So should we do an official goodbye?
Let's do an official goodbye, and then we can do that talk. So look, thank you very much. And I look forward to seeing you when lockdown is over.
Yeah, you too.
Cheers.
Thank you very much. Bye.